In 2023, we had the pleasure of visiting what may just be the most disappointing theme park of our lives. Back around 2018, we released one of our first theme park videos on the failure of Wonderland Sydney, and a name that came up multiple times within it was Sunway. The Sunway Group is a Malaysian company that bought Wonderland Sydney in 1997 and pretty much ran it into the ground by 2004. Over those 7 years, they added exactly one new ride, and it wasn't even really new. They just grabbed the old cable car from the Sydney Showgrounds and called it a day. As time dragged on, they gradually downsized the park piece by piece, shutting down popular rides such as the Beastie to save on costs. But Sunway wasn't exactly new to the theme park game. They own a lot of stuff: universities, medical centers, shopping malls, and even a pyramid, which is actually just a shopping mall. And in 1993, they decided to roll out their very own flagship theme park in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Sunway Lagoon. When Wonderland Sydney finally whimpered into its closure, it was quickly scheduled for demolition. While some of the rides, such as the aforementioned Beastie, were ultimately bulldozed, a majority of the attractions were actually sold on to continue their journeys at other amusement parks. One of these was Bounty's Revenge, a Ranger loop-in starship built by Swiss manufacturer Intamin, which was refurbished and reopened at Sunway Lagoon in 2005 with a new name called Pirate's Revenge. That's how Sunway Lagoon first caught our attention. A literal piece of Wonderland history now living a second life in Malaysia. But being halfway across the world, it wasn't a place we thought that we'd ever visit. Fast forward to the present, and Southeast Asia's booming theme park scene kind of caught our attention, thanks to the likes of Universal Studios Singapore and Genting SkyWorld. Suddenly, a trip to Malaysia didn't seem so far-fetched, especially with cheap flights from Australia dangling the temptation. So in October of 2023, we finally found ourselves face-to-face with Sunway Lagoon. And oh boys, this park's something. Look, we're called Review Time for a reason. We love reviewing theme parks, but we've never encountered a park where the day was so chaotically bizarre that it almost feels unfair to give it a proper review. Between the two of us, we've hit up over 50 theme parks worldwide, and this one, let's just say the experience is something we'll never forget, and for all the wrong reasons. This is our experience at Sunway Lagoon.
Sunway Lagoon's history is not all that well documented. It's reported to have begun operating in 1992, but was officially opened on the 29th of April, 1993. When it opened, the park was split into two sections, the water park and the dry park. As the name implies, one was wet and the other was dry. Sunway Lagoon, along with the surrounding Sunway City, were constructed into an existing abandoned tin mine. Because of this, the bulk of the park is uniquely situated 150 feet below ground level, and its horizon is dominated by grand skyrises and buildings that make up Sunway City. Since its initial opening, Sunway Lagoon has expanded quite a lot to become a park of all trades and master of some. In 2007, a new wildlife section was added, introducing animals and exhibits to the park. The next year, Scream Park was added as a new land in collaboration with Linton v. Harris of the Sudden Impact Entertainment Company, known for scare mazes at Dreamworld, Thorpe Park, Madame Tussauds London, Universal Studios Hollywood, and more. By 2023, Sunway Lagoon would occupy 88 acres with 90 attractions across its 6 lands that it refers to as different parks. Frankly, the park is big. Really big, and its attractions are spread out all over the place.
In a theme park? Sunway Lagoon has multiple entrances, but we started our day at the main entrance after being dropped off by a grab car, essentially a Southeast Asian Uber. We will admit that part of the reason for starting here was because there was a Starbucks within walking distance of the entrance, and whilst we both think that most of what Starbucks offers is dreadful, we are addicted to vanilla sweet cream cold brews. Seriously, those things essentially fuel review time trips. The park officially opens at 10 AM and closes very late, sometimes around 11 PM. They also had their Halloween event that night, and still buzzing from Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios Singapore just a few nights earlier, we thought we would stick around to check it out. We weren't exactly in a rush to get into the park, knowing it was going to be a long day. We eventually rocked up to the entrance at roughly 10:45 AM, and thankfully, entry was very straightforward. We purchased our tickets online and just needed to scan our phones to get in. But once inside, we noticed a problem. Everything was closed. This is not all that uncommon. We have arrived at some parks where certain attractions don't open for hours after they let guests in, but here, everything was closed. Not a single ride was operating. That's when we realized we might have made a mistake getting there this early. Now, as mentioned before, Sunway Lagoon is made up of a bunch of different parks. The main entrance puts you into what is known as Sunway Lagoon Amusement Park, with part of this being made up by Sunway Lagoon Night Parks. A little bit confusing, but follow with me. Basically, this is a portion of the park that stays open until 11 PM at night, but checking the map also appears to open its attractions much later in the day at around 2 PM. This meant that we had roughly 4 hours to kill before any of those rides would start operating. Now, there are close to 90 attractions across Sunway Lagoon, so no biggie, we thought. This park is huge. Those 4 hours will go by in a heartbeat, so we set out exploring. This park has to be one of the most confusing layouts we've ever experienced. Not only is it composed of multiple parks, but each one of these is spread across multiple levels, so you have to rely on multiple stairs, escalators, ramps, and elevators to go from one place to another. These access routes are not all well featured on the map, and logical pathways just don't seem to exist between locations. Likewise, there were plenty of areas that were just blocked off for no real reason, so even if a sign pointed in a certain direction, you'd often have to backtrack after reaching an undocumented dead end. Expect to walk a lot. We didn't even spend a full day here and walked over 20,000 steps. We're at Universal Studios Singapore from open till close just a few days before and walked 24,000 steps. I do not want to know what would have happened to our legs if we stayed until 11 PM. But anyway, we kept exploring.
But what do these 6 theme parks in one actually contain? Some of these attractions have gone down in review time history as the most bizarre and story time worthy of any we've ever experienced. The main draw for Sunway Lagoon is definitely the water park sections. These were packed with guests all having a great time. The slides seemed of a decent variety, and there were more than enough places to cool down in the humid Malaysian heat. The one water slide we did go on was Vuvuzela, the world's largest vortex ride. You'll notice this park loves to advertise its hyper-specific records. This ride was decent, but the size kind of became a bad thing, as you didn't get those extreme angles you usually get when riding up a funnel. One thing you usually can't go wrong with is a wave pool. If all else is failing, you can just sit back and chill. And Sunway Lagoon had the potential to be the most chill of all water parks, as they have the world's largest surf pool. On our visit though, it was closed, with no indication before we got into the park. And the reason why? Well, you would never guess, and we'll definitely talk about in a bit more detail later. The only other swimmers required experience we had was a world's first, and hopefully last, Waterplex 5D. Never have I felt as much pure anger towards an attraction as I felt in that seat. This attraction is what you get when you mix a 4D cinema with a fire hydrant. Sitting and being jostled around whilst watching the film, you're occasionally absolutely blasted by water so aggressively you feel like a fire trying to be put out. Within the first 10 seconds of the attraction, I had water blasted in my ears that I couldn't get out for hours, and my 3D glasses were so soaked I literally couldn't see the film I was meant to be watching. Drying off after this water-based assault, we headed back towards the dry attractions. Only open for a few hours of the day was the park's scare attraction. In the queue, we were warned of the intensity of this experience, clocking in at a whopping 30 minutes long. This was the one and only open attraction in Linton v. Harris's Scream Park, named after the person who owns a third-party company that built the mazes. You know, a completely normal naming convention, just like all coasters are called Mr. Mac's Wild Ride. We entered the first room in a group of about 30, where we were introduced to the attraction, and again, warned of its scare factor. Bursting through a door, one scare actor spooked people so good they refused to continue, leaving us with a group of around 20 as we headed deeper into the experience, excited for what was to come next. Ushered into a well-themed room looking like an outdoor courtyard, we quickly realized how this attraction was so long. For the next 20 minutes, we were subject to one of the worst movies I have ever seen. I genuinely can't even remember the exact storyline, but a creepy-looking ghost girl was walking through caves and caverns. At pivotal points throughout the film, actors would slowly slam doors and windows, and one actor would walk very slowly down the aisle, doing a whole lot of nothing. The final 7 minutes of the attraction was a decently themed scare maze with like 2 actors, though it did scare the pants off a random guest in our group so good he was literally pushing women and children out of the way so he could leave the experience. At one point, we went to get in the queue for the park's only roller coaster, the Lost City of Gold Scream Coaster, and we were greeted with a 60-minute wait time sign. This ride did open a few hours later than the rest of the park, so we thought, wow, everyone must have run here. But checking the queue out of curiosity, we went upstairs to find about 5 people waiting. So we thought, well, the sign must just be wrong. That was until we waited over 20 minutes with nothing happening. The staff were just standing around the station, and all the other guests had just sat on the floor. We have no idea what happened, as we weren't told anything, but our only guess is that the ride was actually going to open in an hour, or had broken down and they thought it would take an hour to fix. This ride does have maintenance issues, as later in the day we came back to a maintenance worker straight up hitting the side of the coaster train with a hammer. Once we finally got on board, the ride was fine, I guess. It's decently themed, but has a rather boring layout. At one point you do go into an indoor area, but it can only be described as shed the ride once that happens. Thankfully, the ride is built on top of a building near the edge of the cliff, so you do get some great overviews of the entire park. But it was finally time to ride Pirates' Revenge. We'd been saving it towards the end as it held that special place in our hearts. When walking into the queue though, one of the 3 ride ops sitting on their phone yelled out, "Hey!" gave us the timeout signal and waved us away. As we left the queue, they followed behind us, putting up the ride closed sign. We never did get to ride Pirates' Revenge. This wasn't the only bizarre interaction with staff though. At another point, we went to try out the ATV experience that was included with park admission. In this attraction, you could drive real, all-terrain vehicles around the hilly terrain at the back of the park. As we walked towards this attraction following the signage, what can only be described as an eardrum-bursting clap was heard from behind us. Quickly spinning around, we were met by the gaze of the angriest theme park staff member I have ever seen, who simply wagged his fingers at us and clapped a second time. We have no idea what he was trying to say, but again, we never did get on that ATV attraction. Now, listen, I used to have a debilitating fear of heights. I know that sounds crazy for a theme park enthusiast, but it was true. Living at Walt Disney World, it took me 9 months to get up the courage to go on Tower of Terror. Thankfully, over the years I've been an enthusiast, I've slowly been able to tackle that fear. In the last few years, I've braved taller and taller attractions until ultimately riding the world's tallest roller coaster. And today, that fear of heights is essentially non-existent. Or so I thought, until I stepped foot on the excitingly named Suspension Bridge at Sunway Lagoon. According to the Malaysian Book of Records, this is Malaysia's longest pedestrian suspension bridge. Woohoo, I guess. This bridge is 428 meters of pure hatred. That is longer than the distance from the Main Street train station to the carousel at the Magic Kingdom. I can't even quite explain why this bridge was so terrifying, but something between the wooden boards with holes in them, the constant movement of the bridge under your feet, and the completely missing slats made my brain activate its fight or flight response and completely shut down. But if walking across this demon bridge isn't enough for you, you can even bungee jump off the middle of it, an experience I, unsurprisingly, decided to pass on.
Up until now, Sunway Lagoon has seemed lackluster, but not exactly the worst theme park ever. However, there's one big thing we haven't mentioned yet, something that managed to elevate this place from mediocre to downright maddening. All day long, we were subjected to a relentless barrage of concert audio testing. Now, you'd expect some sort of area music at a theme park, maybe the latest top 40 hits, or even a quirky thematic soundtrack to add to some of the atmosphere. But no, Sunway Lagoon had something truly special planned for us. Instead of any actual music, we got endless sound checks blaring throughout every corner of the park. No matter where we went, whether we were trying to ride a coaster, grab some food, or just take a breather, it was there. The same monotonous testing on a loop. It was like being trapped in a never-ending concert warm-up with no escape. We later found out this audio assault was in preparation for a Timmy Trumpet concert happening that night on the park's beach, which, by the way, explains why the entire beach area, including the surf pool, was closed. So not only were we denied access to a huge section of the park, but we were treated to an all-day sneak preview of ear-splitting mic checks. But then, about an hour before we left, we thought our suffering had finally come to an end. The mic checks stopped. Sweet, sweet silence. Or so we thought, until the hype guy took to the stage. And by hype guy, I mean a man yelling into a microphone at an empty beach trying to get a non-existent crowd to jump up and get hyped. We're talking a full-blown festival energy directed at nothing but air. Imagine standing in a nearly deserted park, listening to this poor soul desperately shouting into the void. Let's just say, after what he did to my ears, Timothy Trumpet and I are not on speaking terms. Nicknames are for friends, Timmy, and this man is no friend of mine. And the audio chaos wasn't the only bizarre thing about Sunway Lagoon. No, the park also gifted us with one of the most unique mascots we've ever seen. Never before have we encountered a park mascot brandishing guns. Forget Mickey Mouse waving at guests, Sunway Lagoon's mascot stands there armed to the teeth. Nothing says family fun quite like a cartoon character packing heat. And then there's the water park. Now, we're not exactly water park enthusiasts, but on the park map, it looked like the water attractions made up maybe half of the offerings. In reality, it felt like 70 to 80% of the park was water-based on the day we visited. Sure, it's called Sunway Lagoon, so we expected a fair bit of water, but the sheer imbalance was wild. If you're not a fan of water slides, wave pools, or getting drenched in general, there wasn't much else for you to do. Sunway Lagoon really turned out to be the gift that kept on giving, just not in the way that we had hoped.
By 3 p.m, we had reached our limit. Between the relentless audio testing and the lack of open attractions, there was nothing left for us to do or, frankly, endure. So we made the wise decision to cut our losses and head to a Gordon Ramsay pizza buffet in the attached shopping centre. Originally, we'd considered sticking around for the park's nighttime Halloween event, but based on the scare attraction we did try, it probably would have just meant spending our night watching lackluster horror movies. Now we want to make one thing clear. We know how incredibly lucky we are to travel the world visiting theme parks. And while this date didn't quite go as planned, as you've probably gathered by now, it's these kind of days that create the most unforgettable stories. Sure, Sunway Lagoon wasn't for us, but hey, it gave us a ton to talk about, right? I genuinely believe people can have a great day at Sunway Lagoon. As we mentioned, there are plenty of attractions and a lot to see and do. The key is to approach it as a water park with some bonus dry rides, rather than expecting a full-fledged theme park experience. If you go in with that mindset, you're likely to have a much better time. Now, some of the attractions didn't quite meet our expectations, but we're admittedly spoiled with a global perspective. We've been lucky enough to visit world-class parks like Disneyland, Tokyo Disney Sea, and Universal Studios Singapore, so it's hard not to compare. That definitely skews our perspective. We can still appreciate what Sunway Lagoon offers within its own context. Now, in saying that, if you've been to Sunway Lagoon and had a great time, we genuinely envy you. But luckily for you, our disappointment turned into one heck of a story. For Dom, I'm Luke. Thanks for watching.